Hello and welcome to this edition of The Slice. I'm your host, Bill Peters, and today we're going to start a series on the beginnings of the Earth and what could have possibly happened in the early days. Now we're only going to go back 2.4 billion years, like that was just yesterday. Well, it wasn't just yesterday, it was one heck of a long time ago. So, at about 2.5 billion years ago, we were in a very deep ice age. As a matter of fact, most of the Earth was covered. Now, this didn't happen again, since that was 5 ice ages ago. So, there's been 5 major ice ages that have been documented, even in this state of Maine where I'm at. Especially up here, because we had 2 miles of ice over us. So that means that everything that was here before the ice age was ground to dust. There was literally very little to find after getting ground over by 2 miles of ice. I mean, just imagine. The pressure per square inch would be tremendous. And then, that was the last ice age. Now, before that, there were many others. There's 4 others besides that. So let's go back 2.4 billion years ago, and we find, and I'll put it up on the screen here. We find that there was a very long ice age there. It went from 2.4 billion years ago to, it started getting warmer about 630 million years ago. Before that, it was pretty cold. It was the median temperature over the average global temperature over the whole Earth, at that point was 50 degrees, and that's major. There were some areas that were not covered at that point, but there was a time when the whole Earth was covered, but it was before this. Okay, so, as you can see on this chart, at 2.4 million years ago, we had 50 degree median temperature. It rose a little bit 850 million years ago, and then dove again at about 700 million years ago. Then we had a huge warm up, and the median temperature of the Earth went up to about 75 degrees. And then it literally, in a very short amount of time. Actually, it takes longer to create the ice age than it does to kill it. The ice age went from 50 degrees median temperature up to 75 degrees median temperature in the space of literally, in this case, a million years. That was enough to jumpstart life forms in a big way. Now, it is during this time period, about, say, 600 million years ago. About 600 million years ago, I feel that we were first discovered by someone outside of our solar system. Also, I feel it seems apparent to me that during that time period, things like giants evolved. Perhaps they colonized here from another place. They seem to have been around even before our modern version of us. And then, 460 million years ago, boom, right back down to 50 degrees all over the world. Boom. Instant ice age. That is also the time period that it seems, now we're talking about 460 to 430 million years ago. In that time period, it seems like that's when Antarctica was on the move. It's also the best time period. You have it flash frozen. Now they found in that little area of Antarctica in the middle there, well, not the middle, but it's up center to one section of the continent, where it had thawed, where it was never snowed and it was never had ice on it, and they found strands of moss and items like smaller life forms, flash frozen. They still can get all the RNA and genes out of it. That's how well preserved it was. And that documentary can be found on Netflix as well. And then 430 million years ago, a rapid increase in temperature up to 78 degrees. And let's see, that puts us in the second ice age that we're talking about out of the 5. Okay, so that went on until about 350 million years ago, when there was a gradual decline in temperatures, again reaching 50 degrees median temperature. And that was pretty radical, but it went slower than the previous one. So that one there brought probably, well, it covered more than the last ice age did as far as ice goes. It went as far down as South America, and probably over a lot of it. There was probably their own glaciers coming out of the mountains there. So then, 260 million years ago, we have a great spike that goes almost to 80 degrees. Almost. That's worldwide global average temperature. And that plateaued for 50 million years or more. And what happened is, during that ice age, there was the dinosaurs were there, the giants were there, the reptilians were there. 200 million years ago, there was quite a dip, but it didn't go down as far as the last ones. It was only to about 63 degrees median temperature. And that there is where I believe a lot of colonization took place. Maybe refugees from doomed planetary systems were dropped here. I believe that's where the Noah's Ark stories came from. And also, I believe that a lot of the Anunnaki activity would have been in that time period. However, the stories continue for another 100 million years, mouth to mouth. We probably came up in technology quite a bit during that time period. And then about 6 million years ago, wham, we got hit with the last ice age. And now this one was devastating because it seems like there was a lot of meteor activity, as well as 200 million years ago, there seems to have been a lot of meteor activity. And we find coal artifacts all the way back to 400 million years ago. And that's 2 ice ages ago. Actually, it's 3 ice ages ago, if you count the one we're in right now. Yes, we're still in an ice age. So it looks like that was when a lot of the high technology got lost, was during those sudden drops. Now, about 8 million years ago, 6 to 8 million years ago, we started dropping again. But we didn't go all the way down to 50 this time. We went down to 53, 54 degrees planet-wide average temperature. That doesn't mean that it was that temperature everywhere. It just means that's the average of all of them, added up and then divided like you did in school. Very simple math. Okay, so, and then we're in the middle of this ice age, the last one that happened. That there ended up crushing most of the technology that was left. What didn't get taken out with the ice was taken out with the floods after the ice melted. The floods from that were caused by the pooling of water around mountaintops. Literally trillions and trillions of gallons of water, fresh water, gathering around these mountain peaks that were sticking up through the glaciers. And they were happening all over the northern part of the northern hemispheres of the world. So when that melted enough, the leading edge of the glacier breaks free and the water comes out with such force and fury that anything caught in its wake is gone. Anyone who had information that this was going to happen escaped. This is another place where Noah's Ark could have been. Actually, some of the flood myths actually are much more detailed than Noah's Ark's story. I believe that if you look back far enough, you'll find flood stories from every time period. That's if the records are kept somewhere where they were safe. Usually underground is the best place for that kind of thing. Now, this means that we were populated all over this world with different races, different colonies, maybe even different life forms that had grown intelligent. And if they were smart, they bailed. So anyway, starting to look at some of this stuff, especially the coal and the sedimentary rock. Now, let's bear in mind as well, when you find something in sedimentary rock can form very, very rapidly, and it can easily form in a decade. I mean, so these rocks that hold hammers and stuff, one could say, well, they could have been made 10 years ago. Well, yes and no. In the case of the Texas one and the California one and the one found in England, two of those were turning to carbon, turning to coal. And that means great age for the most part, especially when you're talking about something as bulky as wood. Peat moss, on the other hand, you can make coal out of that fairly rapidly. And most scientists say that the peat moss is where all coal comes from. And that's actually not an accurate statement, because any organic material can create coal in enough quantity. The reason they say that is because most of the new coal, it was formed by peat moss, not from an impact event or a flood event. How does that happen, you might ask? And I was like, well, okay. Let's say you have a huge area of land, and you have a civilization going, and a meteor strikes. Now, when a meteor strikes, a big one, it throws tons and tons and tons of earth and material into the air. And it has to come down somewhere. And it's going to come down thick, especially closer to the epicenter of the strike. So anything that's covered rapidly, and there's enough of it, is going to turn to coal eventually with enough weight and pressure and time. And in this case, you can tell how old coal is by the hardness and the way that the carbon molecules have broken down. So them finding coal with an iron pot in it, in coal that's 3 million years old or 4 million years old, would have to tell you that there was technology and humans or some kind of life form living in that time period. So this is just logic. I mean, let's be honest. So we've covered the fact that coal can be formed quickly, but that it can be measured, its age can be measured by strata and hardness. Soft coal is newer coal. Hard coal is very old coal. Okay. Now we all know that carbon dating is can be faked out on occasion, and obviously it's been done. It's happened. So let's keep an open mind on that. Now this chart here shows global temperatures from 2500 BC to what it will be in 2040. Now we are definitely right now coming out of an ice age still. So this climate change is true, but not for the reasons stated. We may have advanced it in speed, but that can happen just from a meteor strike. So if we look at 2200 BC, we find a warming period that is starting to decline. Now this, let me look here. Okay. So this, the sudden cool down, was in 2200 BC, was a direct result of at least 10 eruptions in Italy, the Pacific, and in Alaska. Now at the bottom of the first dip is the Nomanic time. And that is the time of the Great Migrations. That's when people were traveling all over the world and trying to get around. And then we start warming up. And there's only a few volcanic eruptions, oddly enough. And it was right during the peak of this, at 1100 BC, that the Hebrews' exodus from Egypt supposedly occurred. And then, shortly thereafter, we get a cool down again. And that's when Pompeii was destroyed, Vesuvius erupted in Italy, and then, it got really cold. That's when the Grecian Empire came to power and all that. And then, let's see, around 2000 BC or so, we get a cool down again. And that's the Grecian Empire coming to being. And then at 2100 BC, it starts warming up, and the Roman Empire is coming into their own and everything like that. And then around 600 BC, it looks like, it says here, we dip into the cold again. And guess what? The Dark Ages ensued. This is a time period where disease was rampant and bad things were happening all over. And it got very cold. Matter of fact, it got very cold. And then, around 1000, about 900 AD, huge warm-up happened. So, we're talking about warming up quite considerably, almost as warm as it was in 1100 BC and in 1300. So almost 1,000 years difference, or 2,000 years difference. It came back to its own. So we're due for a warm-up, a big one. Now, in 1300 AD, there was a huge dump. It just got way cold, and it's called the Little Ice Age during that time period. Very cold. There was a lot of major eruptions during that time period. So, you can imagine it was probably blocking the sun a lot. And then since then, let's say we got a nice spike of heat in 1991. It dumped back down, and then it jumped back up in 98, and then it dropped way down again. And 2005, it's still dropping, actually, the temperatures. And it's postulated that in 2020, we'll start getting warmer again. And by 2038, we should be as warm as we was in 1100 BC, which for some will be nice, but for others not so nice, as it will change the levels of the ocean. But anyway, we still have not come out of that ice age that started 8 million years ago. And today, we're not even up to 60 degrees yet. For the median temperature. I mean, today we're at probably 58 degrees, 59. I mean, we've got a long ways to go to get to what we're headed for. So it's going to warm up more and more until it gets up to that 75 degree median temperature. And then once that happens, it's either going to be millions of years of heat or millions of years of cold. And that's probably not something you want to know about. Yeah, we won't probably live to see any of that. Point being is that we really don't know what's going to happen. And all we know is that we probably shouldn't help contribute to it. Okay, so that covers the global warming, people. Yes, it's warming, but it's supposed to. It's just part of the plan, you know. So that's today's show. And then the next show is going to go into time periods that I feel we became populated. I mentioned it briefly. This show was mostly just to explain the ice ages, the cycle, and how life could have been here in between all that. I feel like giants, in some cases, not all, giants were in some cases either colonists or were brought here. The Chinese mentioned that they came from the stars. The Aborigines of Australia came from the stars, so as they say. The Hopis as well. The local people here in my state, the Passamaquoddy Indians, say that they came out of a tree in China. Okay, perhaps that's where they landed. But they talk about going to meet the sun and walking on ice for a long time before they got to the state, and they got to the Far East, the first place that the America sees light, anyway. So from Eastport to China is a long ways, and they move, and they call this continent Turtle Island. Now, if you turn it, the continent, a certain way, it does look like a turtle. My question is, how did they know what it looked like? If they know what it looked like, then my question then is, they must have been in space, so who brought them here? Because they do not claim to have come here on their own. They would claim to have been brought here. Now, there is a theory that there was a major calamity in space where one of the twin sisters exploded. Now, it recently was there, and I mean a few years ago, and just blinked out. Actually, it's probably a decade now. But point is that stars come and go, and they do blink out of existence on occasion. And if that was where they came from, if they were traveling at above light speed, then they would have got here ages ago, and there would have been time dilation and such. So that disappearing in this day and age is not too far-fetched. If there was a calamity back in time, and obviously it happened millions of years ago, that star stopped being a star, because it takes that long just for the light to get here. So that means that either the Hopi and those other races may have been brought here as refugees. Remember, the Hopis say they were kept beneath the ground for a long time, and then they were brought to the surface. Well, they may not have known that there was an in-between time if they were put in stasis or something like that until they got here. It's really, of course, we can't really know unless we find some spaceship deep in the rock or something. And that's another point. If a craft was brought here millions and millions of years ago, say the second ice age we had, it could easily be buried under rock. It may not even be recognizable for what it is. It could be rock by now, or at least a fossil of something. We won't see, it won't be easy to find because there wasn't that many inhabitants of the planet then. A few colonists here and there. This is just theory now. Let's not take this as me saying it's fact. It is after 35 years of research that I've come to these conclusions, not just sitting in my room smoking a bowl or something and coming up with this stuff. It's based on solid research that has taken a long time to formulate into this total package deal that I'm presenting. I'm not presenting it as a theory, just my theory. There is some substantial evidence to support a lot of these comments, but I'll leave that for another time when on the next show, we'll go into coal at different time periods and look at how close these time periods were to the events of an ice age, whether or not there's evidence of meteor strikes during that time period, and whether or not it's even feasible that human beings of some sort, whether it be reptilians, giants, Pleiades, people, whatever,